Imagine standing on a battlefield 2,000 years ago. The ground trembles under marching feet. A sea of shields and spears stretches to the horizon, and at the center of it all, the Roman soldier. But strip away the myths, the Hollywood costumes, and the museum replicas. What did these men really wear into battle? Was it shining armor that dazzled the sun? Or something far more practical, forged for survival rather than spectacle? Today, we uncover the truth about the clothes and armor that built an empire. Beneath every piece of armor and weaponry, the Roman soldier relied on the most basic but essential garment, the woolen tunic. This was not an outfit designed for beauty or extravagance, but for endurance. The tunic was usually made of coarse wool, woven tightly enough to keep warmth during cold nights, yet breathable enough for long marches under the scorching sun. It was cut simply, often knee-length, allowing the soldier to move freely in battle. Some were dyed in shades of red, not only because the color symbolized strength and discipline, but because red helped to hide bloodstains during combat. Others remained in their natural earth tones, which blended into the rugged landscape soldiers often crossed. The tunic was a practical choice, lightweight yet durable, and it became the soldier's constant companion whether he was fighting, marching, or resting. A belt, usually made of leather, was worn around the waist to hold the tunic in place. This wasn't just about appearance, it gave the soldier more control over his clothing. By tightening the belt, he could adjust the tunic's length, shortening it for battle or lengthening it for warmth. It allowed freedom of movement without excess fabric getting in the way of his sword or shield. Even this small detail reflected Roman discipline and practicality. Every element of a soldier's attire was carefully considered, and nothing was wasted. What makes the tunic especially remarkable is how universal it was. From new recruits to seasoned veterans, almost every soldier wore one, regardless of their rank. Officers might have finer versions, sometimes with better dye or higher quality wool, but the design remained the same. This gave the Roman army a sense of unity. When tens of thousands of soldiers stood together, all in their tunics, belts tightened, armor strapped over the top, they looked like one organized body, not just scattered individuals. This uniformity was part of Rome's strength. It turned men from different regions speaking different dialects into one unstoppable force. The tunic also served as a soldier's home on the move. It was easy to clean, easy to repair, and could even be used as a makeshift cloth for carrying supplies when needed. Many soldiers only had one or two tunics, and they wore them day after day on campaign, through mud, rain, and heat. It was not glamorous, but it was reliable. The tunic absorbed sweat, protected against the rough feel of armor, and gave the men something constant as they marched across unfamiliar lands. When we think about Roman soldiers, we often imagine the armor, helmets, and weapons. But without the tunic, none of it would have been possible. It was the first layer, the foundation that supported everything else, and without it, the soldier would have been exposed to discomfort and weakness. The tunic may have seemed ordinary, but for the men who carried Rome's power to the ends of the earth, it was as vital as the sword in their hands or the shield on their arm. When most people picture Roman soldiers, their minds go straight to the gleaming bands of armor known as the lorica segmentata. This distinctive style, made of overlapping iron plates fastened together with leather straps, has become the classic image of a legionary. It was strong, flexible, and intimidating, designed to protect the chest and shoulders while still allowing a man to move freely. Each segment overlapped like scales, distributing the force of enemy strikes and reducing the chance of a deep wound. Yet, as famous as it is today, the lorica segmentata was not the most common armor worn across Rome's vast armies. In fact, its use was often limited to certain periods and legions, and many soldiers never wore it at all. Far more widespread was the lorica hamata, or chainmail. Crafted from thousands of interlocking iron rings, it took immense effort and skill to produce, but once made, it was reliable and long-lasting. The chainmail absorbed the impact of slashing blows and offered excellent protection against cuts. Its biggest strength was its durability. It could be repaired in the field with simple tools, unlike the more complex segmented plates. Many veterans preferred it because they trusted it through years of service, and it was common to see entire units outfitted in mail rather than plates. Then there was the lorica squamata, or scale armor. This style consisted of small metal scales sewn or riveted onto a fabric or leather backing, giving the appearance of a shimmering coat. The scales overlapped tightly, making it highly resistant to piercing strikes like arrows or javelins. Scale armor was popular among cavalry and officers, as its surface caught the sunlight and gave them a more commanding presence on the battlefield. However, it was heavier and less flexible than chainmail, and if damaged, it was harder to repair. Still, it symbolized prestige, and its appearance alone could strike awe in allies and fear in enemies. The diversity of armor tells us something important. Roman soldiers were not uniform statues of bronze and iron, but adaptable men equipped for different needs. The army was pragmatic. Armor was chosen depending on resources, location, and the demands of the campaign. A soldier in the forests of Germania might be dressed differently than one stationed in the deserts of Syria. What united them was not identical equipment, but the discipline and training that made every piece of armor effective. Armor was never just about defense. It was about survival and psychology. The glint of polished plates or scales could intimidate an opponent before swords ever clashed. A line of soldiers armored in mail, shields locked, and helmets gleaming would appear less like men and more like a moving wall of iron. Each type of armor carried a tactical purpose, but all shared one goal: to keep the soldier alive long enough to fight for Rome's cause. No Roman soldier would have stepped onto the battlefield without his helmet. Known as the galea, it was more than just a shell of metal to protect the head. It was a carefully engineered piece of equipment designed to balance safety, comfort, and visibility. The typical galea was forged from iron or bronze, with a rounded dome that deflected overhead blows and cheek guards that shielded the face without limiting speech. At the back, a projecting neck guard curved outward, preventing downward strikes from enemy swords or axes from splitting the skull or spine. Every feature had purpose, a result of centuries of experimentation in the art of war. The design of helmets varied depending on era and region. Early Roman helmets were influenced by Etruscan and Greek designs, often simple bronze pieces shaped to fit the skull. As Rome expanded, so did the styles. By the height of the empire, helmets were more sophisticated, fitted with ridges to deflect strikes and reinforced bands across the crown for extra strength. The cheek pieces were hinged so they could move with the soldier's jaw, giving protection without pinching or cutting into the skin. For soldiers who fought in the crushing formations of the legion, this meant being able to fight for hours without their own gear slowing them down. Some helmets were plain and purely functional, while others bore decoration that revealed rank or status. Officers often wore helmets adorned with crests of horsehair or feathers, mounted front to back or side to side. These crests made them instantly recognizable to their men in the chaos of combat, allowing soldiers to follow orders and maintain formation. The bright colors and height of these crests also served another purpose. They made the officers look larger and more imposing to the enemy. In battle, appearances mattered, and the Romans knew how to turn fear into a weapon. Even for common legionaries, the galea had a psychological role. A line of men in matching helmets, shields raised, and armor gleaming in the sun was a sight meant to intimidate. The enemy did not see individuals, but a disciplined machine, faceless behind iron masks. In addition, helmets often carried subtle designs, raised eyebrows or ridged brows hammered into the metal, giving the impression of stern, unyielding expressions. These small artistic touches transformed protective gear into a display of power. Comfort, too, was not ignored. Many helmets were lined with padding or leather to cushion the head and absorb sweat. A helmet that fit poorly could be as dangerous as no helmet at all, blinding a soldier with pain or sliding out of place during combat. Roman armorers understood this, and helmets were often carefully adjusted to fit the man who wore them. The galea was therefore not just a piece of equipment, but a vital symbol of Rome's military might. It protected the soldier physically while projecting unity, discipline, and authority. On the battlefield, the glint of hundreds of helmets advancing in unison was more than a defense. It was a warning to Rome's enemies that the empire was coming, unstoppable and unbreakable. Among all the equipment a Roman soldier carried, none was more iconic or more essential than the shield, the mighty scutum. Unlike the small round shields of the Greeks or the narrow bucklers used by other cultures, the scutum was a massive curved rectangle, often about 4 feet tall and wide enough to cover most of a man's body. It was built from layers of wood glued together, reinforced with leather and rimmed with iron to stop splintering. At its center was a heavy iron boss, a round bulge that could deflect enemy blows or be used as a weapon to punch into an opponent's face or chest. The scutum was not just a piece of armor. It was the backbone of Roman battlefield tactics. Its curved shape gave it strength and stability. When held at the side, it protected a soldier's body from shoulder to knee. When raised overhead, it could block arrows raining down from above. This design allowed Roman soldiers to fight in tightly packed formations, where each man's shield overlapped with his neighbor's, creating a living wall of wood and iron. Against this, spears and swords often broke harmlessly, leaving enemies frustrated and vulnerable. The most famous use of the scutum was in the testudo or tortoise formation. Soldiers locked their shields together in front, to the sides, and overhead, forming a shell of protection that slowly advanced under a storm of arrows or stones. It was nearly impossible to penetrate, and it allowed the legions to march straight into fortified positions or across open ground under fire. This formation symbolized the discipline and unity of Rome's armies. Each shield alone was useful, but together, they became almost invincible. The scutum also carried powerful imagery. Shields were often painted with bright designs, lightning bolts, eagles, or wings, symbols of Jupiter and Rome's military might. These patterns not only identified a legion but also terrified opponents, for an advancing wall of identical shields seemed more like a machine than a group of men. To enemies, the sight was overwhelming, a solid wave of color and iron pushing relentlessly forward. But the scutum was more than just defense. Soldiers were trained to use it offensively, shoving enemies off balance, striking with the boss, and opening space for the gladius to finish the fight. In many battles, victory was decided not only by the sword, but by the shield that allowed the soldier to stand and strike without fear. Durable, versatile, and symbolic, the scutum represented the Roman way of war, practical yet imposing, disciplined yet deadly. It turned ordinary men into a single unit, advancing as one. With their shields raised, the legions were more than soldiers. They were an unstoppable force carrying Rome's power into every corner of the known world. Around a Roman soldier's waist hung one of the most important pieces of his kit, the cingulum or military belt. At first glance, it may have looked ordinary, a strip of leather with metal fittings, but it was far more than a way to hold clothing together. The cingulum was a mark of identity. To wear it meant you were a soldier of Rome, a man under discipline, part of the greatest army in the world. It was decorated with metal studs and sometimes dangling straps that jingled as the soldier marched, an audible reminder of the presence and order of the legions. But its practical purpose was just as vital. The cingulum carried weapons, ensured quick access to the sword, and balanced the soldier's gear during long marches. Hanging from the belt was the gladius, the short sword that became the symbol of Roman conquest. Unlike long, heavy blades, the gladius was compact, usually around 18 to 24 inches in length. It was designed for thrusting, not slashing, and in the tight crush of Roman formations, this made it deadly. Soldiers could stab quickly from behind their shields, striking vital organs before the enemy had time to react. The gladius was not flashy, but it was brutally efficient, perfectly suited to the style of combat the legions mastered. Alongside it was the pugio, a smaller dagger worn as a backup. Though often overlooked, the pugio was a last line of defense if a soldier lost his sword or was caught in close struggle. It also had practical uses off the battlefield, from cutting rope to preparing food, reminding us that Roman soldiers had to live as well as fight. No less important were the boots known as galea. To modern eyes, they may appear as little more than sandals, but they were carefully crafted for endurance. Made from thick leather with open spaces to let the feet breathe, they prevented overheating during long summer marches. The soles were reinforced with iron hobnails, giving grip on rocky ground and preventing the leather from wearing out too quickly. Each pair of galea could carry a man across 20 miles of rough terrain in a single day, and they were so durable that discarded soles have been found even in distant corners of the empire. Without these boots, Rome's armies could not have moved as swiftly, or endured the endless campaigns that stretched across continents. Together, the belt, sword, dagger, and boots turned a soldier into a mobile weapon. The cingulum declared his role, the gladius gave him lethal reach, the pugio offered security, and the caligi gave him the strength to keep moving. These were not just items of gear, but extensions of the soldier himself. They allowed him to march across deserts, forests, and mountains, to stand in battle line after battle line, and to survive the endless grind of Rome's wars. While armor and shields made him safe, It was these tools that made him dangerous and allowed him to carry the Empire's power on every campaign. Beyond armor, shields, and weapons, the daily life of a Roman soldier required something far more ordinary but equally vital: clothing and equipment for survival. War was not fought only on the battlefield. It was endured on endless marches in sudden storms and during long nights far from home. To face these challenges, soldiers relied on cloaks, tools, and simple gear that often mattered as much as a sword or helmet. The most common outer garment was the sagum, a heavy woolen cloak pinned at the shoulder. It was plain, practical, and tough, often dyed in shades of red or brown. The sagum kept a man warm during cold nights and served as a shield against rain and wind. When a soldier slept, it doubled as a blanket, wrapped tightly around his body on the hard ground. This simple cloak became a soldier's constant companion, worn through mud, smoke, and blood, far more personal than the armor strapped to his body. In harsher climates, cloaks were lined with fur or layered with leather, because the legions marched everywhere, from the hot deserts of Africa to the frozen frontiers of Germania. Clothing was just one part of the burden. Roman soldiers were expected to carry their world on their backs. Each man bore a pack with essential tools: a cooking pot, a cup, a water flask, and sometimes even grain rations. They carried spare sandals because miles of marching could destroy even the toughest caliggi. They also carried digging tools, stakes for camp palisades, and sometimes even small shovels. The Roman army did not travel with massive supply wagons like other armies. Instead, each soldier was self-reliant, able to set up camp and survive with what he carried. This earned them the nickname Marius's Mules, after the general who first required such discipline. The reality of campaign life was far from glamorous. Soldiers sweated under the summer sun, froze in winter rain, and often went weeks without proper shelter. Their tunics became stained with dirt and blood, their cloaks stiff with grime. Yet this was by design. Roman military clothing was not meant for comfort but for endurance. Everything was made to last, to protect, and to keep a soldier alive long enough to fight another day. These extras, the cloak, the tools, the spare gear, may seem small compared to shining armor and sharp swords, but they were the difference between an army that collapsed after one battle and an army that could march for months across hostile territory. Roman soldiers were not only fighters, they were builders, marchers, and survivors. Their clothing and gear reflected that reality. In the end, what a soldier wore and carried revealed Rome's greatest strength: discipline. Every man was prepared for the cold, the heat, the mud, and the endless grind of campaign life. Cloaks, tools, and simple garments made the legions not only deadly in combat, but also unstoppable in endurance. It was not glory or gold that kept them moving, but wool, leather, iron, and the discipline to use them well. When we strip away the myths, the polished movie costumes, and the golden helmets of imagination, the truth of what Roman soldiers wore is far more revealing and far more impressive. These men were not dressed for show. They were clothed for survival, for endurance, and for the kind of grinding warfare that built an empire lasting centuries. At the foundation was the tunic, simple yet sturdy, a woolen garment that gave them freedom of movement and a sense of unity. Over it came the armor, not always the famous segmented plates, but often chainmail or scales chosen because they worked, because they could be repaired, because they kept a man alive when the enemy pressed hard. Their helmets, carefully shaped to guard the head and face, were both protection and a symbol, turning individual soldiers into an iron wall that seemed unbreakable. And at the front of that wall stood the scutum, the great shield, the heart of Roman tactics, transforming thousands of men into one advancing fortress. Then came the tools of offense, the gladius, short and sharp, perfect for the brutal reality of close combat, the pugio for emergencies, and the caligae, tough boots that carried men across continents. Alongside these weapons, the cingulum belt declared their identity as soldiers, binding them to the army and the empire. And beyond the battlefield, the cloak, the sagum, and the soldier's pack made survival possible on endless marches and through unforgiving seasons. Taken together, this clothing and equipment tell us something vital. Rome's strength was not built on glittering armor or the promise of comfort. It was built on practicality, discipline, and the ability to adapt. Every stitch of wool, every piece of iron, every strap of leather was designed with a single purpose: keeping the soldier alive and ready to fight. And that more than any battlefield victory, explains how Rome's legions could conquer and hold such a vast world. So what did Roman soldiers really wear in battle? They wore the empire itself. Every tunic, shield, sword, and cloak was part of a system, a machine of war that never stopped moving forward. Their clothing was not decoration. It was the armor of survival, the uniform of discipline, and the fabric of conquest. Through it, Rome marched farther, fought harder, and endured longer than nearly any other power in history. And in the end, that is why the image of the Roman soldier, simple tunic beneath iron and shield, still stands today as the face of empire,